All right, I hope you guys have had a chance to write your questions and send them along. To reiterate, there is no 1-minute warning. Again, the way this is going to work is the theist table will begin asking their first question. The atheist table will be given 2 minutes to respond. And the theist table will then be given a 1-minute counter response. The theist table will then ask their second question till the third question. Once their 3 questions are complete, the atheist table will then take their turn. I will ring the bell when time is up, so no 1-minute warning. You may begin.
First question. Throughout history, science has been wrong more often than it's been right. Your stipulation, Mr. Barker, is the fact that since the God of the gaps has been wrong, how do you answer the question that science has also often given the science of the gaps? Does it mean, therefore, that science is now nullified? Since you say that those who've given wrong answer for a God, therefore religion is wrong, science has also given many wrong conclusions. Does it mean, therefore, that science is also invalid?
The way that science learns that it is wrong is by science. Science is self-correcting. Science overturns previous notions. Scientists don't just stand up one day and scratch their head and say, oh, I guess we were wrong. A hypothesis that had been nearly universally accepted by science in the past can be overturned by stronger data, newer data. And it is this open process. In fact, scientists are hoping that some of the hypotheses are wrong because they can make careers out of that. I'll get closer? Okay. So, contrary to your assertion, Hassanein, the willingness of scientists to admit mistakes and in some cases the glee of scientists to move on from a previously erroneous conclusion to based on stronger data is actually a testament in favor of the success of science. Science obtains knowledge by limiting. Science advances by cutting away what we know to be false. And one of the biggest processes of science is to throw away what is false, and what is left we hold on to. And no scientist will claim a 100% confidence level in anything. But we get to a level of 95, 97, 98, whatever, and we get to the place where scientists are now confident enough to say we are going with this as a fact. However, every scientist is open to changing their mind. So, no, the fact that scientists have been proved wrong in the past is a complement to science. It is a strengthening factor of science. It is in praise of science, and I thank you for praising science.
1 minute time response.
So you do agree, then, that since science is in constant flux, it is not stable. It is in constant change. That means all your postulations today could all be totally wrong. And if that is the case, how do you propose the idea of you being so firm with the notion that God doesn't exist?
There's a response.
Second question from the theist table first.
Yeah, my question is, if the system of the universe is so inherently flawed, that means that both of you and all of us in this room are accidents ultimately, the consequence of accidents and so forth. But if your thought processes are accidental in nature and ultimately accidental, what reason do we have for believing them to be true?
Excuse me, let me get the microphone here. The reason is that we are not just random assemblies of atoms. We've evolved. We have a hand, for example, that can grasp things. It has an ability, and it evolved to develop that ability through natural selection. The intelligence, our ability to reason, is the same thing.
We've already established, pardon me, that intelligence did not evolve by natural selection.
Well, actually, it's not been established. You didn't even name who it was you were quoting on that subject, so I don't even know what evidence you were referring to.
John Barrow and Frank Tipler in the Anthropic Cosmological
Okay, you said they were non-theists. Those are Christians.
They're scientists.
Yeah, but they're still Christians who write creationist literature.
Okay, you're going to be given an extra 10 seconds if we can...
John Barrow does not call himself that.
Well, okay, but he is. No, intelligence is useful for long-term planning, for understanding the ability to come up with new plans and new situations in reaction to feedback, and so forth. There are so many evolutionary advantages to intelligence that this is one of the things that drove the development of our brain. This is well understood by science. There's several books out explaining the theory of how intelligence arose through natural selection. So we have an explanation for that.
That is simply not the case, and in fact, it's C.O. Lovejoy who came up with the idea, and I can describe it right here for everyone to understand. There are two liabilities that selection chooses against in the rise of intelligence. First of all, the more intelligent a being, the larger their brain, the more likely the mother is to die during childbirth. Therefore, there is an uppermost limit to intelligence. Selection would choose smaller-brained beings, not larger-brained. Please let me finish. Second, intelligent beings require a protracted childhood, and protracted childhoods require a lot more time in which you can be attacked by predators and so forth. So selection would choose for beings with a shorter gestational time and a shorter childhood. And this has been established beyond question, which is why the world's leading non-theistic evolutionists do not believe intelligence can be found anywhere else in the entire cosmos. And I have personally gotten the comment from Sir Francisco Ayala, who is one of the world's leading non-theistic evolutionists at UC Irvine. He's more familiar with my books than either of you, and he would not argue with this argument.
Third question from the theist table, please.
An interesting point to make is Mr. Carey just added another facet to science, which is a belief, meaning you have to be an atheistic science to have any credibility to any kind of science. The next question. Since you do not believe in accountability as far as the longevity of one's actions, meaning that when a person commits a crime and he gets away with the crime, or a genocidal murderer who has killed an entire society and is not dealt with in the system of justice, how do you answer to your moral code, which you have individualized and saying that we need to reduce the harm? How do you come up with that answer?
Well, first, obviously, we're accountable to society, but you're asking about situations where society cannot mete out accountability. In that situation, as I said in my rebuttal, when people perform evil, when they act without love in their hearts, they basically develop a personal hell for themselves. Their lives become miserable. They're not happy. Whereas people who live by love, who have love in their hearts, are happy. They develop a life of happiness, and they're at peace. And this is the difference between whether you do good or bad, and this is the accountability. It depends on whether you create a personal hell for yourself on this earth or a personal heaven for yourself on this earth. And that is the difference.
In your writings, you've written that I am a happy person in this world. I love people, but then when I die, I go to nothing. And nothing means I don't even have my fears to worry about because I have no fear. So would it not therefore mean that for a person who goes into a hospital and sees a bunch of children who are suffering to put bullets into their heads and say, you know what, why are they suffering? Let's take them to nothing. And let them not have any pain because you know what? They came from nothing. Let's take them back to nothing. Yet you find the atheist goes to the hospital and has himself fixed when he's ill. So what happiness are we talking about?
We now have the first question from the atheist table, please.
Okay, this is for both of you, but Mr. Corey especially. You claim we have no explanation for why the multiverse exists, but we said you also have no explanation for why God exists. On that level, both are equally ad hoc. So my question is this. Smolin's multiverse theory follows necessarily from the simplest possible hypothesis, the existence of a sea of random fluctuations. In other words, from a condition of fundamental disorder, which necessarily will randomly produce many different pools of order, getting the process started. In contrast, you propose that by sheer chance, we just happen to get a single, highly ordered, superintelligent mind with numerous amazing powers and convenient attributes and desires. Doesn't that mean your theory and not ours violates Occam's razor?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. First of all, the principle of self-existence that you were referring to does not apply to any physical system, nor has it ever been applied to any physical system, because it does not belong in the definition of physical systems. Aseity, or self-existence, belongs to one being only, and that is the absolute one God, that we call Allah. And I propose that given the principle of sufficient reason, which I presume that you both affirm, do you affirm the principle of sufficient reason? Do you all affirm it?
I'm not sure in this particular instance what you're getting at.
Well, the principle of sufficient reason is that everything has a sufficient reason for its existence, the most basic of all scientific beliefs. Do you believe that?
Well, the problem with that is that if you start with a situation of fundamental disorder, you can have something like, for example, a deity can, like you say, can exist without a sufficient reason. So there are some things that can exist without a sufficient reason. And I would say that there are other things. It doesn't necessarily have to be something with a mind. I mean, it doesn't necessarily follow that something that exists necessarily by itself must have a mind. It could be something else.
So
it
you
could have
believe
that
things
as a
can
property.
exist without a sufficient reason?
Well, do you think God can exist without a sufficient reason?
He contains within himself the sufficient reason for his own existence.
Well, then I say the same thing about the sea of fundamental randomness.
Well, my point that I'm getting at is the principle of sufficient reason demands that you offer us a sufficient reason for the existence of the cosmos, given the finely tuned nature
Well,
of the
I
cosmos.
have, actually.
Well,
I've given a sufficient reason for the fine-tuning that you're
You've
talking about.
used a fringe element, Lee Smolin, who is
Oh,
not accepted.
no. This is not a fringe element. This is hundreds of physicists now. This is a cover story in Scientific
I
American.
read that article.
I can quote you several, or cite you several papers in peer-reviewed scientific journals talking
the
about
article's trying to get away from singularities, yet singularities exist at the center of every black hole.
How do you know that?
I read it.
What's the difference between a black hole and a singularity? Do you know the difference?
Of course I do.
So how do you know that every black hole has a singularity? You've never seen one.
Because it's common, basic physics.
But it's not anymore. That's the point. I mean, it says here the cover story. The time before time, the Big Bang might not have been the beginning.
You just evidently didn't understand what you read.
Oh, I'm sure I did. Trust me.
Hassanein, during your rebuttal, you called me a liar. You said I speak lies with no substance. You called me an angry person, although I don't think I've acted angry in any way. You said that I and Richard have a morality with no accountability within it. And you also accused me of engaging in ad hominem. Let me ask you, why are the comments that you made during your rebuttal not equally, if not worse, ad hominem to my personal character?
Very simple. It was not ad hominem from my side at all. It's a rebuttal. First of all, when I started my presentation, I brought forth arguments about the existence of God. Rather than you following that pathway, you came and you said, Mr. Corey believes in the divinity of Christ. Mr. Corey never said this in this debate. That's a lie. Public lie. He never admitted to that. And therefore, and the other thing, the other aspect to understand is that
Just move the mic closer.
for you to make jeers, as I don't know if you heard the moderator say, that you must not make fun of people's beliefs. Now, you've methodically done this in every debate that you've done. I know when you did Fernandez's debate, you did the same thing. It was like an open book. In fact, you just have to give us your articles and we'll read it for you. But the idea is, oh, what goes up must come down. It shows a lot of anger in you when other people pray. And I think there's something wrong there. If you're coming as a free thinker and saying, let's have freedom of individuality, and a group of individuals want to worship, you may not agree in their existence, but they do. Why does it bother you? I don't understand this free-thinking mentality when you have to go around and stop people from worshiping what they believe in. This notion isn't there. There's a problem there. We have not come to stop you from believing in the non-existence of God. Look, we're having this debate. We respect you. We're honored with your presence. It's not a personal attack, but I think your rebuttal should have been more substantive rather than just looking at us and saying, that's a Christian, that's a Muslim, they're fighting it out, you know, they're all wrong, and therefore we're good. No, I don't think that's proper ethics.
Thanks, Hussein. 1 minute counter response.
Michael Corey has been identified as a Christian theist for the purposes of tonight's debate. A Christian is a person who believes the Bible, who follows Christ, whatever that might mean, and Christians are not agreed on that. But in any event, Christ is considered to be the Son of God. If I'm wrong about your theology, I apologize, but I assumed based on the introduction that you were a Christian theist, that you have views like that. To make fun of a person's beliefs is not the same as making fun of the person. I think there's a place for ridicule of beliefs that are nonsensical. But that does not mean I'm attacking you as a person. I'm not calling you a liar. I'm not saying that you are unaccountable or that you are immoral. I praise you. I recognize your goodness as a human being who has risen above the immorality of your religious system. Your system is nonsensical and immoral, but you are a good man, and I cherish you, and I enjoy being in the presence of a person like you. I do not attack you or call you an angry liar, because I know better than that after having met you. So I know Richard has read Michael's book. I apologize, I have not read your book. Have you read my book, Michael? Losing Faith in Faith?
I didn't attack you.
Thank you.
You say immorality of Islam in Islam. I don't understand. Do you realize that the very morality we're having this discussion with is based on our religion?
You may ask your third question.
Yeah. Now, evolution is based on cutthroat competition, violence, starvation, murder, and merciless brutality. Many animals eat each other alive, their prey wailing and screaming in pain and horror. Now, to me, I can't see how that can possibly be God's plan. Very few animals are as lucky as us and evolve as social animals. Most live in this horrible world. God's plan surely would be survival of the kindest, where all animals that help and nurture each other get most of the resources and stay healthier and reproduce more, so cruel animals would tend to die out, but that isn't what happens. Therefore, evolution accomplishes the exact opposite of what I would think a divine plan is. It more often kills the kindest and more often sports the brutest. Now, here's my question. Traditionally, Satan is the one who believes in might makes right, just like the way evolution works. So doesn't evolution look much more like a plan the devil would devise?
I think that really reflects a non-understanding of the basic principles that are at work in evolution. First of all, you're anthropomorphizing the suffering of animals, and the whole concept of the problem of evil is not a legitimate answer to the question of design, which, in fact, you all have not stepped up to the plate and answered. When I asked if you had a sufficient explanation for the existence of our universe, there has been just silence on your end. That tells me that you do not have a legitimate counter-argument, and Lee Smollen's argument has been laughed off the table. Maybe the majority of the people in the audience don't know that, but I know that. And this article was simply written, for...
Can you cite an article or a scientific author in a peer-reviewed journal that has critiqued or attacked Smollen's theory?
Everybody.
Everybody.
Pretty much it is
You're
not...
saying everybody.
All the physicists that I have read, yes.
Some names, please.
Paul Davies. Are you really questioning this?
I just want to get on record
Who you
think has said this.
Are you presupposing that Lee Smollen is an advocate or represents the consensus position?
No, he represents a very strong contingent in the scientific community that is now rising towards very interesting agreements and developments towards quantum cosmology.
It's a very small,
You're saying they're being laughed off the table by Paul Davies. I'm just...
There's not even any evidence for one other universe, much less a multiverse. And
well, there is some evidence. I presented it in my opening.
That's not evidence.
We can't actually see it, but there's evidence in the nature of this universe that suggests that Lee Smollen's theory is correct.
You can't see it.
If you can't see it, how's it evidence?
But we can see it.
The first question is directed at Dan Barker. Since you claim that the immaterial cause does not exist, you are implying that you have known the whole existence and have not found in it room for an immaterial cause. Can you, therefore, advance a proof in support of this general knowledge and a justification of the absolute negation of the immaterial cause in the form of reason and not direct sense experience? The reason we say that sense experience cannot be considered a proof for the negation is because the non-existence of a superior cause in the empirical realm does not prove the non-existence of that cause in a superior realm not touched by direct sense experience. 2 minutes response followed by a 1 minute counter.
Okay, I know that the way this debate was formulated, does God not exist, pretends to put the burden of proof on us atheists. Originally, a year ago, it was going to be, does God exist? But it was changed to, does God not exist? Which puts us in the strange position of saying, yes, God does not exist. And they are replying by, no, God does not exist. I mean, think how weird that is. If something does not exist, if something truly is non-existent, then the only possible evidence you could have for its non-existence would be an absence of evidence for its existence. If something is truly non-existent, you don't ask for evidence of its non-existence, right? Do unicorns exist? Is there any evidence of the non-existence of unicorn? We do know how the myth of unicorns arise through history. We've looked around as far as we can, we don't see unicorns. They might be out there somewhere. But am I supposed to go through the entire universe and look at every planet and star to see if there's any unicorns hanging out there before I can say, no, unicorns don't exist? We come to a sort of a probability level. We get to the point where we say enough is enough. So I think, some people say the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But if something truly does not exist, then the only possible evidence of absence you could have would be an absence of evidence. Therefore, we atheists who do not hold to the hypothesis that you are proposing show that the absence of evidence for your case constitutes positive evidence for our position, because you think God exists and you think we have the burden of proof of disclaiming that. But we see no evidence for it, we see no good argument for it, and we think you have the burden of proof. We both agree, you and I both agree there's a physical universe, right? It is you who is making the additional claim that there's something above and beyond. Since you are making the claim, you are responsible for providing proof and evidence for that claim, and so far you have not done that.
1 minute counter.
Apparently you were not listening to my presentation then, because the evidence is yourself and myself. The fact that I exist, the ontological argument, as Mr. Carrier says, evidential presuppositionalism, all these nice, very fancy words. I exist. Where did I come from? I'm going out to the universe to look for something? Hey, look at the mirror. That's all you need to do. So for someone to say that I don't have enough evidence, where did I come from? Where did this order come from? Where does the universe? From nothing comes nothing. We know that. So would you go into a laboratory and do an experiment with nothing and bounce nothing with nothing and therefore have something? Yes. You say the laws of accidents. Can accidents happen when there's nothing there? What science is this? Imagine me going to do my PhD and I present an entire thesis. I said I took a little of nothing and then I mixed it with a lot of nothing. And guess what? I got this spectacular universe.
The next question is directed at Hassanain Rajab Ali. If nothing can come into existence without a creator, then where did God come from? 2 minutes.
Good point. If nothing can come into existence without something, that's good. That's a good question to ask. This is the whole notion of the whole reality of the absolute creator, meaning he is not bound in time, matter, nor space. He is the creator. He is the immovable mover. You cannot apply relative physics to the absolute. God is not bound in time, matter, nor space. So to ask, where is he? People came and asked our messenger, where is God? He says, no, when was God born? He says, tell me when he wasn't there so I can tell you when he was born. Prove to me that he didn't exist. For someone to reject the existence of God, and I show this to you, you cannot have an infinitude of causes and effects. There has to be an immovable mover. This is a scientific, logical, rational position, which you need to come and falsify, my opponents. You have not falsified. Falsify my existence. Falsify your existence. Then maybe you'd be able to talk about the non-existence of God. But you know what? You wouldn't be able to because you wouldn't be there.
I have a brief.
Sorry, go ahead. You still have time.
Yes. I have a brief point I just wanted to add to the previous question. I just didn't get a chance to get it in. And that is that the whole point of my presentation is that there is not an absence of evidence. There is an overwhelming preponderance of evidence for which the only rational conclusion is that of an omnipotent, omniscient designer. And I'm not the only person to draw this conclusion. Tens of thousands of atheistic scientists have jumped ship because they were intimately familiar with the scientific data. And until you can propose a legitimate explanation, a sufficient explanation, if you will, then our position of a divine creator and design has to stand by default. You can't just simply shoot something down without offering something else that's plausible in its place.
1 minute counter response, please.
I met Paul Davies at a conference last year, and he was asked what did he think about the existence of a God. And with all of his brilliant knowledge, Paul Davies said, I have no use for that word, for that concept. So it doesn't follow that he's theistic in his thoughts. So that's what he said. It's on record, and I'll play you a tape recording of it if you'd like. Okay, I'll provide you with a tape recording. But your response, Hassanain, to that question amounts to nothing more than begging the question. Because the argument that is used for the existence of your God is an argument based on complexity. You're saying everything that has complexity or existence or design or whatever you want to call that gap requires some kind of a designer. Well, doesn't the mind of God exhibit functional complexity? Is the mind of God a random jumble, or is it a functionally complex thing that itself calls out for an explanation? You miss the point of the question, because if your argument is true, then God himself does need an explanation. And if you want to abandon the arguments that you've been using and just simply assert, which seems to be what you're doing, then you are simply begging the question by bringing your conclusion into your argument. And that is illogical and irresponsible.
The next question is directed to Richard Carrier. I'm a physics major and was stunned by your statement, order can result from natural forces. This statement is in clear contradiction and violation of the second law of thermodynamics, which states natural forces are moving toward a higher state of entropy and disorder. Thus, the fallacy of your argument is manifested by your ignorance of systems moving forward. 2-minute response, please.
The science there is wrong. That's not what the second law states. The second law states that when work is performed, the total amount of disordered energy in the world increases. And what this means is that it doesn't mean that things become disordered. And this has been proven. In fact, the man who proved it, Ilya Prigogine, in the 1970s, won the Nobel Prize for proving it, which is a concept called dissipative systems, which actually trade order for entropy. They create more entropy in the world, but at the same time create more ordered systems by using the energy that becomes more entropic as a result of that. So there's no conflict at all between forces interacting and naturally causing order and the second law of thermodynamics. This is especially true given that once you pass the barrier of a black hole, especially if you pass the Planck length, according to Planck's barrier that Mr. Corey talked about, the laws of thermodynamics no longer apply. So the second law of thermodynamics doesn't even apply at that level of the universe. But even in the level of the universe we're at now, its application does not prevent the creation of ordered systems through natural forces.
There is a presupposition here that this entropy that we're talking about, the second law of thermodynamics, is in itself not need of order. When you say the second law of thermodynamics, which encompasses which? order is encompassed with disorder, or does disorder allow order to encompass it? This presupposition that when I'm under the law of something which allows me randomness, we must never forget that that randomness is completely controlled under an orderly system. You cannot have total randomness because it means nothing. Scientifically, it's absolutely nonsensical. It needs to be under a controlled system. So when we're talking about random orders, it's like a computer program that can randomly bring out random numbers that does not have any pattern to point a finger at. Therefore, that's random. But it's the control of the order system that allows the disorder to exist under. How do you answer to those kinds of questions?
Okay.
Oh, are we?
The next question is directed at Michael Corey. Where did God come from? Has God always existed, and is God a man?
For one thing, God is truth. I think we can all agree that God is truth. And God is love. And I have no problem with conceptualizing how truth and love could have always existed and could have had self-existence as part of God's nature. And look at the number line. It has no beginning and no end, and yet we work with numbers every day. God is the being by which the entire universe came into being, the uncaused cause that Brother Hassanein was talking about, that Aristotle and Plato agreed on, that we can't make sense out of the cosmos otherwise. And I don't see any discrepancy there with our position whatsoever. And, of course, God is not a man. God is in the superior realm.
Okay.
Well, if God is not male, how did he get a woman pregnant, you know?
Is that your counter response, or are you going to use up your 1 minute? That's your counter response?
Show response.
Okay. Next question is directed at Dan Barker. Since you hold to the principle of falsifiability, can you show us a circumstance when falsifiability can be falsified? If not, then it is an illogical principle to hold to.
I thought I answered that question during my rebuttal. When you're talking about statements, statements have terms within them. Propositions have terms within them. And a testable proposition, a testable statement is one that contains at least one term in it that has a referent to reality. You know, the word polar bear, for example, or some other reference to reality. But you can play word games. You can play grammar games with statements and make statements about statements. And statements about statements about statements. And you can make these meta statements. And then when you get up to that kind of weird level, then you don't have any more referent to reality where there's a testability to it. So sure, you can play these games and say falsifiability, and I would respond by saying, well, that's just a nonsensical thing. That wasn't the point of falsifiability in the first place. It'd be like asking, what is north of the North Pole? Well, nothing. I mean, that's the singularity there. That's the zero. You don't ask. You could ask the question, but it's nonsense. So I think a lot of these supposed rebuttals of falsifiability fall into that game of the mistakes that happen when you go into meta-philosophy or meta-statements. And a fuzziness. For example, Michael seems not to understand the different uses to which the word universe has been put. It's true, Michael, you're right that to most philosophers, the word universe means all there is. But it is also now true in the most recent decades that to most scientists, the word universe has a different meaning from that. To most scientists today, the universe is this particular universe, or one of many, our observable universe. So to a philosopher to use the phrase this universe would be unthinkable, but not to a scientist. A scientist can use the phrase this universe quite logically because that's the way science is going. So I think you misunderstand the use of the word universe there.
1 minute counter response.
You know, it seems like you need to see bears to be able to understand what it means to falsify. So maybe the book that I showed you showing parts of the greater, you were not able to falsify that. Maybe it's not big enough for you to see it. Okay, you're saying it's statements. This is a reality. I can touch the book and I can even give it to you. I'd like you to touch it and say the greater and the lesser. Okay, I'd like you to falsify that, please. You cannot. So how can you take this litmus test and apply it on all notions? you come up with this idea that we can falsify anything by using this terminology when science itself is in flux by your admittance, and it doesn't have total validity where anyone can put his finger on and say, this is immutable. No. Today I can say to you, this is where the problem of morality comes in. It fluctuates. I can make good today, and evil will be good tomorrow, and anything can be whatever you want because we're in constant flux anyway.
Okay. Next question goes to Hassanein Rajabali. Do we really have a choice of good versus evil if God has already predetermined what will or is going to happen before we decide?
God has not predetermined. This predeterminism is an incorrect understanding. We have been given free will to choose whatever we will within the parameters of choice. I, being a human being born in this time scale, I have no choice in that. The fact that I exist on Earth and not on a different planet is not my choice. So there are parameters by my own existence which are not within my free will. But my free will to choose right from wrong is certainly a free will. God's knowledge of the absolute, God's knowledge of this time that we understand it, He's not bound in time. He does not have past, present, and future. His knowledge is. You and I are undergoing this problem of time. So His knowledge is. Who would worship a God who doesn't know what's going to happen tomorrow? Number one problem. The fact that I've been given free will, it's the wisdom of God to allow me to choose my own destiny, and therefore when I make a good choice, it elevates me as an individual. And when I'm the recipient of that reward, it is because He has allowed me to elevate my own self. This is a great, great reality that we exist under. And to say that God has predetermined me would be like a playwright who's written a play, and you and I are simply the actors. That is absolutely furthest away from the truth. There is no predeterminism at all in the religion of Islam. Not at all. As a matter of fact, if you see the atheistic position that God is so evil, and therefore He should not exist, I ask you, since you want to throw all the evil to God, why don't you take all the good and give it to Him too?
Go ahead, one minute.
Well, we probably would give Him some credit for the good if we believed He existed. We don't give Him credit for evil because we don't think He exists, so He doesn't even exist to cause evil. My only objection to what you say, and in fact, I have no problem with the idea of free will being compatible with the existence of God. I don't think there's a logical contradiction there. What does concern me, though, is the idea that responsibility is all or nothing. If you have a mafia boss and he orders somebody to go and kill someone, that mafia boss didn't do the deed, but he's still accountable legally. He can still be tried for murder. Same thing, if he sets up a situation that causes someone's death accidentally, he's responsible, even though he wasn't there and didn't actually physically push someone over a railing or whatever. But if he made the situation where someone would fall over a railing, he's accountable. So even, and this is true even given the free will of the assassin that the mafioso sends off, and this is true even given the free will of whoever walked up to the rail and accidentally fell over. So even though free will is consistent with the existence of God, we still have the problem of the accountability of God.